All right, welcome everyone to the first ever live recording of the Financially Legal podcast. And we took a big risk today with our guest.
This is questionable judgment at best.
Well, our regular listeners will know that we've been focused on helping firms answer the question, what case management software should I use at my firm, for months now. And you'll know that we've interviewed legal tech executives and we've interviewed some consultants who help firms select and implement technology. But today, very excited to welcome someone who's in the unique position of being in both of those roles.
Yeah, it's a blast. No, it's great. It's great.
Jared Correia lives on both sides of the legal tech buyer's journey. He's the co-founder and COO of Gideon Software, client intake and document automation platform. He's the CEO of Red Cave Consulting, which we'll focus on most today. Red Cave is a company that helps law firms select and implement the right technology. He's the host of the Legal Toolkit podcast, columnist on Attorney at Work, and lawyerist, and contributor in many other capacities, helping law firms succeed. So I don't think it's an exaggeration, and Jared, you could stop me if I'm wrong, but to say that through your businesses and also through your content that you put out there, you've helped tens of thousands of law firms improve, run more efficiently, and set up better technology. So I'm incredibly excited to welcome you to the Financially Legal Live podcast today.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I think that's probably true. It's thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Yeah, I mean, I've had probably like 3,000-4,000 consulting interactions with law firms.
Wow.
And then I know that folks listen to podcasts and read articles that never reach out to me. And then I've got bar association partnerships. So yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I still like doing it.
Yeah.
So it's fun for me. People have weird hobbies. I guess that's mine. But thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. Normally, we just turn it over and say, go do your own intro. But I'd love to focus it a little bit here and tell a little bit about your journey to end up on kind of both sides of the legal tech buyer's journey, if you will. At the same time, too.
Yeah. It's like a lengthy and weird journey. So starting out, like I was actually a practicing lawyer for a little while, and I hated law practice. It was awful. Sorry, everybody. I was not about that life. So I went to law school. And I didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of a career, but I was in collegiate debate, and I was really good at that. And so I just went to law school, and I ended up going to career services, and I was like, I think I want to do business consulting for lawyers. And they were like, get a real job. I said, okay, because they wanted me to practice law because that makes their numbers look better. So I practiced law for about 5 years, and then I fell in with there was a free service through the state of Massachusetts, still around, called Law Office Management Assistance Program. Mm-hmm. And basically, you got to consult with attorneys. And I was like, this is perfect. This is what I want to do. And I can get a ton of reps. And I did that for several years. And I started my own consulting company. And then when I started the consulting company, like a couple of years in, I was talking with my partner on Gideon. His name's Alan. And I was like, there's so much case management software out there. Everything's like back office software for lawyers. So I would love it if somebody had like an intake solution. Like there's not a whole lot of front end technology that law firms use. So he had an idea for that he was already working on. And so we partnered together on that, got some funding, built it out. And now it's a much more robust product than it had been. So that's how I get into both sides of it. So I started practicing, then consulting. Then while I continued to consult, I also did build a legal software. And it's wild. I was just talking to somebody and they were talking about, hey, I've considered doing stuff outside of legal. And I'm like, me too. But then I was like, I'm maybe just like getting myself a different set of problems, not the same one. And it's the same thing. Like there's certain things that you have to do to run a law firm effectively. And then there's certain things you have to do to run a technology company effectively. They're different, but neither of them are easy necessarily.
Yeah. It definitely, well, I can speak to one side at least, definitely keeps us engaged, if you will.
Can I tell you the funniest thing is like, so I'm doing the consulting stuff and I'm always like, hey, you really need this feature. But then when you're talking about like the software development stuff, people are like, you really need that feature. And I'm like, yeah, I know. We've had this in mind to build it for like 3 years, but we got to wait to build it out in a certain venue. And like, we need to get the funding to do it. Yes, it's the whole thing. So it's funny to see it on both sides almost at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You get the question, why can't you do this? It seems like it would be really easy. And you're like,
Right.
yeah, I totally agree. It just doesn't.
I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, man. Awesome. So you've worked with thousands of law firms on the consulting side. Do you have
Yeah.
like a story that really exemplifies what the problems you set out to solve, or
I got some wild stories, man. Not a lot of them I can share publicly. I got a good one for you, though. So with the consulting clients I have, I try to keep everything confidential.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're law firms and they appreciate that. But when I was practicing law, and I can tell the story because I think everybody involved has passed away, I started out with this. It was like an old school professional association. There were like 3 or 4 law firms in one building together. And one of the guys was like a 6'8" Navy SEAL who was probably like 75 years old. And he wouldn't mow the lawn. His wife kept asking him to mow the lawn, wouldn't do it. So what he would do is he would wake up before her and go to the office. So one day he goes, gets a giant burrito, breakfast burrito, before he goes to the office. He's got to use the facilities, right? Doesn't realize he's clogged the toilet, falls asleep at his desk, and the toilet starts overflowing. There's a doctor's office below us. Water's everywhere. It hits like some electrical box. Doctor's office is on fire. Our office is on fire. This building is in flames, and this guy's like sleeping at his desk. So the firemen come in, and they start giving this guy CPR because they think he's dead. He's just taking a nap. And he's like, what's going on? And they're like, the building's on fire. And so they get this guy out. And I showed up to work on Monday. Like, the building is burnt to a crisp. The window for my office has been hatcheted open by the firemen. And like all of the records for the firm are like destroyed. And the doctor's office below it. Craziest thing I've ever seen. And so what does that make me think of? Me? Do we have the data backed up effectively? Of course not. Nobody does. So when people tell me, like, when I talk to people about data backup, and they're like, oh, that'll never happen. I'm like, well, let me tell you something.
Let me tell you.
that may be my best. That may be my best story I can tell.
Oh, that's great.
Totally true. Totally true.
Awesome. So again, you've worked with thousands of law firms. Like, what generates the call to you? Like, what are the signs that things need to change at the firm?
I think it's been a few things that I've noticed, couple more lately. Like, the first thing is that there's always like some low-level disaster of some kind. It doesn't have to be like your building is burning down, but like the server's coming to the end of its usable life. And now we got to figure out how to get into the cloud, right? Now we put money in the wrong account. So we got a letter from our board of our overseers. Can you help us figure out the technology part of that? Something like that. Some breakdown in the system. And then lately what's interesting is, like, when the pandemic hit, that changed a couple things. So there are these lawyers work forever. You've got 90-year-old lawyers working with 25-year-old lawyers. It's just crazy. And the differences are so stark. But what happened when the pandemic hit was a lot of those 90-year-old, 80-year-old, 70-year-old lawyers like, I'm not dealing with this. I'm going to go home and stop working. And so these younger attorneys have started taking over law firms, and they're much more open to technology. So now I'm getting calls from these attorneys, and they're like, I just inherited this law firm. Like, the technology is terrible. We're not even on the cloud. We're using all these legacy systems. I want to change the whole thing. And those folks, they're young enough, they're digital natives, but they don't necessarily know the business landscape for software. And it's complex. There's like so many different tools. So advising people on that. And then the other thing I would say, which has sort of driven the use of intake software by law firms, is you had a period in which law firms could have very analog intake processes. Like, you come into my office, you hand me a check, you sign this contract with a pen, that kind of thing. And that disappeared overnight. And law firms were freaking out about that. So they started to understand, oh, I need like a system to do intake for my clients. And I need to be in a position where I can establish processes that are digital. And even if I'm going to still do like more of the high touch stuff, let's say you're an estate planning attorney, you want somebody to come into your firm so they can like have the cookies that you make and stuff like that. You still need a digital process for the people who want that, because they're going to be upset if they can't like book an appointment with you online. So those are like probably the 3 most common areas where people are coming to me.
Interesting. You mentioned estate planning. Do you see any practice areas that are more focused on kind of that digital transformation than others, or?
I see it everywhere, actually.
Mhm,
And people always ask me that, like, where do you get most of your clients
mhm,
from? And really, it's like pretty much across the board. Like, I've got immigration firms, I've got estate planning firms, I've got litigation firms, I've got small business corporate firms. Like, I deal with like every kind of law firm from B2C to B2B. And I have found that generally speaking, they're all more interested in process than they've ever been. So the thing that I think is interesting was people used to call me and they're like, okay, like my business isn't working the way I want it to. I don't understand why. What am I doing wrong?
mhm,
And I would tell them, like, okay, we need to focus on processes. We need to have workflows that can be more efficient. A lot of that lives in technology. Now people are coming to me and they're saying, I need a workflow. And I think that
mhm.
is progress as far as
Yeah.
I'm concerned.
It's like a better end in mind.
Yeah, I think it's like a knowledge gap for attorneys because, like,
Mhm,
lawyers often come to things later. Like, the thing about lawyers is they just want to be lawyers. Like, they
mhm,
love, like, most of the attorneys I talk to, they really enjoy practicing law, and then this
mhm,
other stuff is a distraction for them.
mhm.
That's not true of everybody. Some people are really good entrepreneurs who are business owners and lawyers second, but
Mhm.
most lawyers like really practicing, and that's what they want to do. So
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So for lawyers that come to you, maybe the ones that don't come to you or the ones that are coming to you for a second surgery, maybe they tried to DIY and it didn't
sometimes
work
that
out
happens.
so
Yes.
well. Where do you see firms go wrong most, especially when they're trying to do it themselves, select and implement tech, that kind of thing?
Well, I think the main thing is that they try to do too much at once. So I found, for whatever reason, I don't know exactly why this is the case, but like for lawyers I've talked to, they're like, okay, I've got 70 different things to do. And they write down the list. And then they're like, that's too much. I can't do any of that. They become immediately overwhelmed and then they stop doing it.
Mhm,
So it sounds silly. But one of the things I try to do with the people I work with is, okay, here's like your list of 70 things. Now
mhm,
you've just talked to me and I've got 50 more things to add to that list. So
mhm,
let's triage that. Let's put
mhm,
together a checklist. Let's run down the checklist. We're going to do this thing first. We're going to knock that out. We're going to do this thing after that. We're going to do this thing after that. And it kind of builds up momentum. And then not only do we move forward on things, but they start to gain confidence. Like, okay, I can do this. I can do that. I can do this other thing. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, but sometimes they can figure it out on their own. And sometimes with help, they can do it. But you build this momentum and you start gathering speed. And it's not just about technology, it's about marketing, it's about hiring and growing the firm. So if you can get these small wins, you can start to move in the right direction. And that's really what I think is the most important thing. That's what trips up most lawyers. And another problem I see is like underutilization of existing tools. So of that list that lawyers have, like
mhm.
I tell them all the time, you should get a case management software. You got a productivity software that's going to do like 10 or 12 different things. So the problem is you're managing like 17 different softwares where you could maybe manage 5. And that becomes
Mhm.
a whole lot easier. So I can't tell you how many lawyers I talk to have an e-signing platform and they've got a payments platform and that's built into their case management system where they're saving their documents in 17 different places. And I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, you got Microsoft or you got Google. Just
Yeah.
use their tool and link it to the case management software.
Mhm.
And to your earlier point, I don't know if we brought this up pre-show or when we were talking just now, but the other thing I think is interesting is like the prevalence of integrations now. Not only can you get direct integrations between a number of different softwares, but with tools like Zapier, you can do indirect integrations, set up triggers, push fields and information back and forth between different softwares. And that makes stuff more streamlined than it's ever been. But it's difficult for attorneys because that's another thing to manage now. So I
Mhm.
guess underscoring all this is if you can be intellectually curious as an attorney and be like, okay, I want to do this thing, and now I got to figure out how to do it using the right softwares, you can get there. But the first thing is like asking the questions about, can I do this better? And a lot of attorneys
Mhm.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that concept of small wins. Definitely seen some firms who could benefit from thinking that way.
I mean, everybody can. It's
Yeah,
true of everything.
I'm thinking
So,
about things in my own life and work that I need to try to do some more bite-sized.
look, I got to build 2 chairs for my island, for my kitchen. I just got to build one. That's what I keep telling myself. And then it'll happen.
So I typed in legal case management software to
Oh, that was your first mistake.
and I got 400 results.
Oh my God.
I mean, that's overwhelming to a firm
Crazy.
that's trying to figure out what do I implement at my firm. What do you say to that?
I know. Other than leave the practice of law. No, I'm just kidding. Don't leave the practice of law. Well, I think the thing is, like, some of these directories, they're just aggregators. So some of this stuff gets misclassified.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking for a certain type of product in an aggregator, I can be like, okay, there's 400 here, but maybe like 100 of them are actually what I'm looking for.
Mhm.
And I think, like we talked about before, attorneys with their list, like I have a list of like 1 million things to do. So I never get to the first one. I think it's the same thing. You look at that list and you're like, I got 400 softwares to choose from. That's ridiculous. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing now because it's easier. So what I tell people to do is, and sometimes attorneys do this on their own, but sometimes like it helps to have somebody to guide them through it, is I tell them it's like buying a house, right? So when you buy a house, you're like, okay, I need a big backyard and I need a 2-car garage and I need 2 bathrooms and I need all this other stuff. But then when you get into the market and you start looking at houses, it's like, well, I guess I can live with a 1-car garage, or maybe the yard doesn't need to be as big as I thought it needed to be. So I tell people, like, build a wish list. And the wish list is 2 things. It's the stuff you really want the software to do, but then it's also the stuff you wish your current software does. The stuff you don't like. If you're using current software, some people are just buying a software for the first time, then it's just a wish list. If you got software you use and you don't like parts of it, let's try to get that fixed as well. And then you got to start doing some demos. Book demos, ask questions, run through your wish list, and then pare it down. So I tell people, like, if you can get things pared down to like 3 or 4 solutions, then you can start to demo those. Then you can start to dive into it. Maybe you do a trial version and actually test it out. Ideally, you get your team involved in that so there's buy-in if you have a team. That's the way to do it. And actually, it's funny, like, one of the reasons that I get people who call me is like they want to whittle down those choices. Like they want to tell me a little bit about what they do, and then I'll say, okay, in this product category, based on your needs, I'd look at these 2 or 3 tools. And then they can start running. Because if they're trying to do demos of 10, 12, 15 products, it's really tough. So I try to shortcut that a little bit. And if you can get it down to that level, like, you can make a choice. And then some of those choices cascade, right? Because let's say you're picking a case management software. Let's say you get into Clio, for example. Everybody knows Clio. They've got 1 million integrations. So you get into Clio and then you're like, oh, look, I can pair it with my accounting software. And I can pair it with my intake software. And I can pair it with this financial software. And I can pair it with all these other tools. So those choices become a little bit easier. And so when I talk to law firms about the software they're picking, to me, there's like 4 main softwares that everything else plays off of. There's case management software, there's the accounting software, there's the CRM, and there is the productivity software. So email, document management stuff. And you string those 4 things together, and that's like the hub. And then you build spokes around that. Is, I think, the best way to approach it.
Yeah. I love the idea of breaking it down into those 4 categories. It's kind of like the central pillars. So.
Yeah, and some people just have 2 of those. Some people just have 1. Like I talked to a lot of firms that are trying to manage everything in a productivity software, but that's problematic because you don't have time and billing.
Yeah.
And then I have some people who are using productivity software and a case management software, but that's problematic because you don't have an intake tool with a lot of those. So it just, if you sit down and think about it and how you would construct a technology platform for your business, it just sort of works out. You can see the logical flow of it.
Yeah. Now we're completely off script here, but
yeah, that's how I like you. That's me, literally anything.
It seems like there's kind of 2 schools of thought in kind of the legal software world, at least the business software. You know, one is sort of like, hey, we're all in one solution and we have our own accounting and whatnot, all built in. And then there's we're kind of integration focused, or we're best in class for this, but we expect you to get separate accounting software, for example. What do you think about those two schools of thought? What's the future? Is there both?
I feel like if you talk to big tech executives, and it's funny, like over the course of time, legal tech executives have become big tech executives. I mean, Clio's worth $1 billion, Filevine's worth a bunch of money. So I think if you talk to folks who run companies, they'd be like, what we're going to do is create the operating system for legal for you. You don't have to go outside of the parameters of our software. But I think in reality, lawyers and other business people want choices. Now, I have seen that work for some law firms. Like, just tell me the least, I don't know. I haven't taken an English class in a while. One of those things. Fewest or least number of softwares I need to run my business effectively, because I don't want to haggle with this integration thing. But then the vast majority of attorneys I talk to, they want to have some choice because they may want to use best in class. And this is not a legal example, but I tell people this all the time. I have Microsoft 365 for my business, and I hate Microsoft Teams. I hate Microsoft Teams with a passion. It's awful. So I will gladly pay Zoom for video conferencing, and I will gladly pay Slack for conversations and threaded discussions, so that I don't have to use Microsoft. I will pay for the privilege of not using Microsoft Teams. And I think a lot of lawyers, when it comes down to it, they're like, hey, this software does like these 8 things really well, but there's these 2 things I want to do differently. And I think if you don't give them the option to integrate with other tools, that can be problematic, because lawyers want that choice. I found they want to be able to use what they view as best in class for everything. And I think this becomes more apparent as you move up the ladder of bigger firms and firms that spend more money advertising, like personal injury firms. I think that's important to people. So my preference is, if I have a tool that professes to do a lot, I may want to use it for 70% of what it does, and then fill in the gaps with the products that I want. And then that software company, I want them to provide a platform where I can connect my stuff to their stuff, either through a direct integration or through an indirect integration.
Yeah, interesting. That makes sense. Yeah,
I'm not a closed universe guy. Never.
Yeah, you really have to, your processes really have to align pretty perfectly with the way that software has developed their all-in-one solution to make
and it's
it work.
interesting. If I can extend on this for a second, what I would also say is, when I talk to people about this, they're often like, oh, okay, I'm going to build this workflow in the software, which I don't think is a good idea. Because I think what happens is you're wedded to the features in that software. So I tell people, like, build the workflow that you want, set up the process, like your best case scenario. I don't care. Write it down on a napkin. Use like a task management tool to set it up. Write it in a Word document. And then let's see if we can build it into the software. And if the software can't accommodate what you want, then maybe you don't have the best software and we need to look at something else. Yeah. But I tell people, build the process first, and then let's find the software that aligns with it.
Interesting. Which is definitely not what you would get sold by the software.
Definitely not. Which is one of the, like, I've worked with a bunch of software companies, obviously, but I never take money from software companies, because I want to be agnostic about this. And I want to be able to say, let's look at your law firm and let's build out what you want to build out. And then let's align the software to it, rather than you picking a software and being hamstrung by the constraints of that tool. Yeah.
Makes sense. So along those lines, especially going back to the fact that you've been on both sides of this, where do you think legal tech sort of gets it wrong in the sales process? Like, where does the hype not live up most often? Are there certain feature sets? Is it the support, onboarding? Like, what should a firm really look out for when they're in the kind of the buying process?
I have to say, I don't think the legal tech folks do a bad job at sales. And I do think they've done a nice job with education. Because I think that's the thing. Lawyers have to understand how software works, because they don't know that intuitively. Now, that being said, if you're a salesperson, your job is to run over the speed bumps and just be like, that's cool. Don't worry. It'll be fine. And this is right. How does it work? It's magic. But I think that's true of every salesperson. Like, that's not just a legal tech thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen where people are like, oh, yeah, I was assured it could do this. Or the one I like is, oh, that's in the development timeline and it should be done in 3 months. Make that 3 years. So I tell people that all the time.
Something.
Yeah, like there's not a techie out there being like, I'm really interested to know what Regina thinks about our software. And I hope she sends an email about a feature she wants to see.
Yeah.
Sorry, nobody's thinking that. So the two things I found is like, let's go with case management software to start with, because that's one of the primary softwares that everybody should be using. I don't like the workflow tools in case management software. I think they could be better. I think that the automation is not quite where it needs to be. And I think maybe this will be helped along once these products start implementing AI in a real way, which is happening. But if you look at standalone task management / project management tools, some products I like are like Trello, Taskade's another good one, Notion's another good one. And that's just a short list. Like, I don't know of a software that has that level of task management. And I like the task management piece of it for its own sake, which means you're running a more streamlined, more automated, more efficient law firm. But I also like the data I can generate from that. So if I'm a law firm, I want to be aware of process efficiency. So how quickly are we moving along? Are we tracking to our goals? And if you don't have really good task management software, it's tougher to generate those reports. So I would like to see a better task management in case management, or at least the ability to integrate with more things directly. The other thing is document assembly. So with case management softwares, the document assembly features are usually pretty simplistic in the sense that I can fill in fields, right? So I can generate an engagement agreement based on a certain practice area. I can generate an invoice. But when I start getting into field logic, for the most part, that falls down. Like, can I build a complicated estate plan in most case management softwares? No, I can't. So I think that gets oversold a little bit as well. And then I think the case management tools have come a long way on the payment side of things, but I think there are some things I still want to see that aren't happening.
Totally.
And that's probably better than anyone. I talk to a lot of law firms about evergreen retainers, right? And a lot of these tools, they have an alarm if you've dipped below your retainer amount. But I would like to see a system where I could just automate the payment for that. And also send out a notice to my client like 5 days ahead, being like, hey, you got a payment coming up. We're just going to process this 5 days from now. Let us know if you have an issue. Like, that should be in there. That's just one example. But those are like the three kind of big topic areas I see. So when I'm talking to people about what are you dissatisfied with and what do you need to be looking for other tools for, those are like probably the most common three.
Oh, that's really interesting. Really interesting. So, yeah.
Ripped from the headlines, as it were.
Law firms beware, and legal tech. Let's work on that and get better.
And I think I think people are willing to have that conversation, but I don't think a lot of law firms ask the right questions. And I think they're sort of like, it's funny with lawyers. Like, I can talk to a lawyer who's just a bear in the courtroom, would do anything to win a litigation case. And then I'm like, you should ask like these 5 questions on a product demo. And all of a sudden they're getting sheepish because they're talking to a 24-year-old salesperson. It cracks me up every time. So like when I do demos with people, I'm like, look, I'm a hot bench. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions and you should do the same thing. If you don't understand something, ask about it. And if there's not a good explanation, then you should be wary.
Oh, interesting.
I love doing product demos. If you're listening and you're a tech company, please hit me up because I would love to eviscerate your product. Present company excluded, of course.
Of course. Awesome. Well, you mentioned the buzzword that we can't have a podcast.
Are we going to do AI now?
In 2024 without an AI question.
All right, let's do it.
We're looking at kind of the case management suite. Where do you think that's going in terms of AI? Like, how does AI fit in that world best? You mentioned some workflow automation potentially.
Yeah.
Like, what's the future of that?
I have extremely mixed feelings on AI. I think the near-term future is implementing some of the generative AI tools. which a lot of these products have already done or are working on. So I think most folks have probably tried like ChatGPT or Google, what's now called Gemini, which was Bard last week, Microsoft Bing Copilot. Twitter's got one called Grok. Like basically they're narrow AI. So they do a task and you ask a question, make a prompt, and it puts out an output for you. You've seen the thing where like people write briefs on AI and there's fake cases in there. That's a use case. Like, let me ask you to do something, you do it for me. Document summaries is a use case. I was talking to somebody about doing deposition summaries the other day. That's a use case. Generating workflows, that's another use case. And AI, I think, is really good for generating workflows and processes because, like I mentioned, a lot of attorneys are stuck with that. So it's challenging for them to be like, okay, let me build out this 10 segment workflow, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. So if you can get AI to do it, it's at least a starting point and you can tweak it. I'm seeing like document drafting features coming. You can potentially use artificial intelligence to do data analysis as well and generate reports. That's available in legal softwares and non-legal softwares right now. A lot of companies are using AI to generate support and help features within their products. Those are the main things I'm seeing right now, but that's just generative AI. If we move into a situation where this mostly theoretical, broader AI happens, where you've got like basically an AI that's like a functioning human that can sense your thoughts and emotions, and at a next level can have their own. First of all, that will probably lead to the apocalypse, but it'll be a fun ride. And I think like for now, in the next like year, 2 years, I think there's going to be a lot of this building on the generative AI tools that are out there. And then the thing I like about it the most actually is that you've got something like ChatGPT that has a large language model. But when you ask it for case law, it'll hallucinate because it won't be able to like, its job is to give you an answer. And if it doesn't have an answer, I tell people it's like a little kid. I'll ask my kid, did you do this thing? And they'll lie right to my face. And then I'll be like, are you sure? And then they'll lie to me again. And AI is like that. So its job is to give you an answer. So it generates cases. So you have cases. And if you're like, hey, AI, are those cases correct? They're like, sure, they're correct, when they're totally not. So the promise for me is like, I can take an AI tool like that has a large language model, white label it in my software, and then attach it to the data sets I have. So I can be in a position where I can eliminate the hallucination problem because I'm using an AI research assistant in Westlaw or Lexis, which has access to those cases. And at another level, I can take a look at this information in my case management software as well and align it with my request into that large language model. So not only am I leveraging this technology, but I'm unifying it with my own data that I already have in system. And I think that's going to be really powerful. So if I'm a lawyer, I'm looking to use the legal technology tools that have AI features rather than these generic or paid general business tools. So that's right. I have no idea where AI is going to be in like 10 years. I could totally see a situation where you've got robot paralegals, robot lawyers. Lawyers tell me all the time, I won't be replaced by AI. Yeah, you absolutely will be. I mean, think of it like, I tell people, if you were a little kid and you could live for an eternity, you never needed to sleep, you didn't have any emotional needs, you could just read books all day from cover to cover, you'd be the most brilliant person alive. And that's AI. Like they can do that. And you start putting that in robots. I sound like Isaac Asimov now. You might want to cut me off at some point.
No, keep going.
It's going to be good for a little while, and then I think it might be a little bit problematic. But near term, I think you're going to see more and more of these providers offering AI-based tools. It's going to start with generative AI, and it's going to go from there.
Yeah, interesting.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
For as long as we remain alive.
Yeah, for now, until we become children of the robots. You've been a big advocate for building. We're switching gears, by the way.
Okay, good, because I'm sick of talking about AI. Let's do it.
A big advocate for running a firm based on data.
Oh, yes.
For the firm that's has that as an aspiration and is in the software selection process with that as one of their top goals, what should that firm be thinking about?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I rarely get that question, actually. So I think people are still a little bit scared off by data, especially lawyers, because lawyers don't like doing the math stuff. But a lot of it's really simple math. And when I talk to people about this, I think of all the other industries that have really been revolutionized by data. Wall Street is all algorithms now. Sports is all algorithms. Like watch any NBA game, and they jack up like 63s, and that's because it's a more valuable shot than the twos. So this is happening everywhere. And lawyers, I think, are a little bit late to the game. But what I am encouraged by is that the software is getting better. So it used to be like your reports were a spreadsheet, really hard to read. Now these software tools are building like these really visual centric dashboards. So I got pie graphs and I've got bar graphs and there's color coding and I can see everything in a really simplistic and easy fashion. And I can also move the dashboards around wherever I want to. So I can put the one dashboard I like on the right-hand side of the screen. I can put the other one on the left-hand side of the screen. And I can have 6 dashboards around financial or other matters respecting my law firm. And I can look at those every day. And the reason this is important is because you're making choices based on the data than hunches. Lawyers always make choices based on hunches. It's all ad hoc. Why is the revenue coming in? Oh, I guess because it's always come in, and I guess it will continue to do so, but I have no idea why. With data, you can start to see trends. You can start to make more informed choices, which I love. So I talk to lawyers about this stuff all the time. Like, okay, we've got this thing you want to do, but is that the right thing to do? Is that the viable choice? Let's not just guess at it. Let's look at the data and see. So to your question, when you're looking at software products for that, what do you look for? I'm looking at what reports come out of the box. What are the default reports? I'm looking at what kind of customizing options do I have there, because not every software will allow you to do custom reports. If you're going to get into this, you're going to want to build custom reports because there are things that are going to be important to your firm that are not important to other firms or not as important to other firms. So that's an important part of it too. I'd be looking at how the dashboards work in the software and how you can array those. I would be looking at how complicated it is to build the reports. Are you going to be able to do it yourself, or are you going to need an implementation consultant to do that for you? And then I'd be thinking internally 2 things. What kind of data is important for us? Like, what's a meaningful action in the firm, and how can we determine if we're achieving our goals under that? And then the other thing is, how are we going to use the data moving forward? Because it's great to generate KPIs, but if you're just doing it as a thing to do and you don't actually exercise any discretion over that data, it's not even worth doing. So you got to figure out how you're going to use it to make choices and move the firm forward. So those are all the things I would be thinking about. And the other thing too is that, like, you're in a position now where every software tool is going to have reporting capability. Those 4 big ones I talked about: CRM, accounting software, law practice management software, right? And even your productivity software to some extent, but to a lesser extent, you can generate reports out of all those tools. And so you got to figure out, okay, not only am I generating reports, but out of what portion of the business: the front end, the back end, the financial part of it, and who's involved in doing that. If I'm generating reports out of QuickBooks, for example, or something like that, is my accountant doing it? Am I doing it? So it can get almost as complex as soccer. Sorry, that was weird. That's a software, so I don't know why I'm thinking about soccer. What a strange thing. It can get that complex, but I think you start with a few KPIs just to get your feet wet, and then you'll probably find that you want to track more as well.
Yeah, interesting. Well, this conversation, I would have a hard time believing it hasn't been incredibly valuable for both the firm seeking new software, but also maybe the legal tech product manager out there who's thinking about what to build next. So
I had fun, at least. I didn't totally blow up your first live show, so I'm happy.
No. I don't think we've done anything too offensive yet.
Good,
so
good.
That's good.
Good. Not yet. There's still time.
But if we have a few minutes left, and in that time, Jared, I'd love for you to give the Red Cave pitch. Like, you've talked a little bit about what you do, but tell us a little bit specifically about how you work. Talk to that firm maybe who's an ideal customer.
Yeah, and it's weird. Like the ideal customer is pretty broad, right? It's the law firm. Um, work with big law firms, work with small law firms. But the way I kind of view it is like we are the practice partner. And I tell people, like, for business management, I tell people, imagine if you had a law firm partner that intimately understood how to run a business, which a lot of them don't, frankly. That's why I've been in business for as long as I have. So I think it's good, even if you're in a big firm or a small firm, to have conversations on a regular basis about how you move your business forward. And a lot of attorneys need prompting for that. So part of it is the accountability piece of it. Part of it is the moving forward on specific projects piece of it. So the way I kind of work with folks is mostly we do subscription stuff. So meeting with people on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. And the idea is, okay, let's jump into this conversation. Let's have a working meeting. Let's try to push the task list forward. Here's our running task list. Here's what's up next. And lawyers aren't going to carve the time out to do that themselves, honestly. And then sometimes I talk with people and they want a plan of action of some kind. So I want to figure out how to create a marketing plan. I want to figure out what my technology platform should look like. I want to figure out whether my financial management is where it should be. And so I'll do audits for firms as well. So I have an audit form for each of those categories, have conversation with the firm, and then we move forward on a plan. And I say, all right, here's your plan. Go run with it. And sometimes people are like, good with that. They follow along themselves. And sometimes they're like, hey, we need to catch up again and talk more regularly. Sometimes I have firms that have big projects they want to engage. Maybe they're doing a rebrand or something like that. And we just offer like hours to them. Like, hey, here's like 12 hours. Use them as often as you want to. We can talk for the next 5 days in a row. So I try to be flexible in terms of how I work with law firms. But the idea is we're in regular communication. We are managing the tasks. We're following up on the tasks, and we're always pushing the business forward.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what's the best way for any listeners to find out more?
I get a lot of people who message me on LinkedIn. You can do that if you feel you must, but just shoot me an email. And then people call me, and like I'm always running around, so I'm maybe not the best to return calls quickly. Email's the best way to do it. And that's just Jared, Jared, at redcavelegal.com. And I'll respond pretty quickly.
Awesome. Well, Jared, really appreciate your time today. It's been
great.
A great first live.
Excellent.
We'll definitely do this more.
I broke the seal for everybody.
Yeah.
Great.
But thanks everyone for tuning in to the latest episode of Financially Legal. For firms that are looking for some ideas on what case management software to use, you can go to confidolegal.com/LCM for legal case management. We have some resources there to help you browse and get your big list down to 3 or 4. And then
Right.
if you're really serious about getting help, then you should reach out to Jared.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. This was great. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jared. And we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.